Welcome. It is just after 7 o'clock, so we are going to get started. I am Dr. Devin Fisher.
I'm Dr. Taylor Newton. Welcome back.
Yeah, and we're glad to be here again. The format we're going to use tonight is going to be pretty similar to what we have used other times this summer so far. We'll have our guest professor, Dr. Monica Campbell, speak for anywhere from 8 to 12 minutes or so. We've been pretty flexible with that. And then we will enter into some question and answer time with our guests tonight. And I think the panelists here have a few questions to begin with, and then we will try to work in questions from the audience. So we invite you to use the Q&A feature in Zoom. We'll be looking for ways to work those in. And as always, please do not feel if you put a question out there and we didn't get to it. We get a lot of questions, and sometimes the conversation just gets going and we don't ever end up getting to all of them. So
It's true. And another option for those of you who are joining us through the live stream on YouTube is we're monitoring the chat channel on that station too. So if you'd like to ask your questions, please do, especially because, oh gosh, y'all are in for a treat. So we are joined by three excellent guests today, including our guest professor for the week. You know her voice, right? So this is now your opportunity to see her face. Dr. Monica Campbell. She is a professor of education here at Lenore-Rhine University, and also the chair of the School of Education here and co-director of the LR Teaching Scholars Program. So Dr. Campbell wears very many important hats here. She is also working with the Hickory Public School System to create a literacy clinic for striving readers. Dr. Campbell has her PhD in special education from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And prior to becoming a professor, she spent 6 years as a special educator in an elementary school in Catawba County, where she taught students with mild to moderate exceptionalities. So our guest professor, and then in addition to our guest professor, we have two special guests. Dr. Whiteside, Dr. LaRonda Whiteside, is the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction for Hickory Public Schools. Dr. Whiteside has a Doctor of Education in Educational Leadership from Gardner-Webb University. And prior to coming to Hickory Public Schools, Dr. Whiteside worked in several roles in education in Rutherford County, including principal of a middle school and elementary school, assistant principal of a middle school, co-director of a high school program called Jumpstart, a math teacher, and a coach for several sports at the middle school level. What were those sports, Dr. Whiteside? I'm curious.
Track, basketball, and softball.
Nice. I'm tall, and people always thought that I should be good at basketball, and my only C in my entire education was in gym for basketball. So in addition to your many skills, I'm glad you have some athletic skills here too, unlike some of us. And you have over 30 years in public education. Wow. So Dr. Robbie Adell is also joining us here tonight, and you know his name, right? Dr. Fisher and I both have kids in the Hickory Public School System, so we, of course, know Dr. Adell, the superintendent of Hickory Public Schools. So our children, Dr. Fisher and I, our children have benefited from the work that you and Dr. Whiteside do. Dr. Adell has a doctorate of education from the University of the Cumberlands in educational leadership and a master's degree in educational leadership from Western Carolina University. He has taught at the University of the Cumberlands and has served as the assistant superintendent for Buncombe County Schools. So again, many years of experience that he is bringing to the job. And we are very pleased to welcome all three of our guests this evening. Dr. Campbell is going to get us started by offering a bit of an overview of the content for this week. So could you remind us where we are, Dr. Campbell?
Sure, thank you. And thank you for the invitation to join this wonderful class. So I'm just going to begin by summarizing some of the salient points. The content for the week really focused on the effects of COVID-19 on the education of our K-12 students. And I concentrated on the inequities that were compounded by the pandemic. And I started with one of the biggest ones, which is the digital divide. And really what that is a gap in the access to devices and technology. And we know that our underrepresented populations in the school have fewer resources in terms of technology at home. In fact, the Education Trust Poll indicates that 1/2 of our students who come from low-income homes just lack access to devices. And then data indicate that last year when the schools closed, that 60% of the students from low-income homes regularly checked into the online instruction or logged in, whereas 90% of students from high-income homes did. So again, there's that gap that we know exists. And in homes where students had access to devices and technology, we know that often there were multiple children in those homes. And so they needed to share devices, or, you know, some of us had issues with the bandwidth at home, and so we couldn't all be on Zoom at the same time. And so parents then kind of filled in as surrogate teachers or caregivers did, and it made it really difficult to continue educating with the same quality that the students were, you know, used to. The second inequity we looked at was nutrition. And there are so many students who really rely on and depend on our public schools for nutrition. And without proper nutrition, it's very difficult for learning to take place. And so I think the data indicate that 1/2 of our the school children in the United States actually qualify for subsidized meals. So there's a real need for the support from the schools in terms of nutrition. Now, I don't think locally we had a lot of issues with that at all, but we do know that other places in the United States, what happened was that when the schools closed, the system designated sites for families to pick up food. But there was then that access issue in terms of transportation. Some families lack the adequate transportation to get to the designated sites. But I know here locally, we did a wonderful job in delivering meals to students. And I think we provided, our wonderful experts who have joined us can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we provided multiple meals per day, breakfast and lunch. So I think locally, again, we did a wonderful job, but that was not the case throughout the United States. We also looked at inequities with support services, and I focused, because of my background, on students with exceptionalities. And these support services are really critical to the academic success of students with disabilities. And because of the social distancing mandates and requirements, many of those services were put on hold. Services such as occupational therapy and physical therapy. In some cases, therapists continue to provide services and they use technology to do so. But again, parents and other caregivers were put in the role of providing those services, and they burned out very quickly. And so we also know that students who were in the process of being evaluated for special services or to receive exceptional children's services, and those who were in their reevaluation and the reevaluation process, those things were delayed. Those processes were delayed for some period of time, again, just because of access issues. We also looked at learning spaces, and wow, that has really been a real issue here thanks to the pandemic. We know that many of our students come from unstable homes, or they live in overcrowded apartments or houses. Our homeless population, they live in shelters, they don't have the privacy that they need, in terms of learning spaces. Many of them are also, dealing with food insecurities and fears of contracting COVID-19. And so they had a lot of issues that they were dealing with in addition to just inadequate learning spaces. And I know for me working from home, I tended to get very distracted. So I can't imagine what happened to our elementary school students, middle and high school students as well. And then the final inequity was the summer slide. And what we know is that in the summer, typically there is a regression of academic skills. And the summer slide, because of the pandemic, has kind of morphed into the COVID slide, because now we have, the combination of the summer learning loss with the COVID learning loss that occurred from mid-March through the end of May. And some experts in the field of education are projecting that when students begin school in the fall, that some will have lost up to 1/3 of the progress that they had made last year in the area of reading, and then over 1/2 of the progress in math. And so that was kind of the bad news that I shared. But then I ended with by sharing some really good news, and that is that we've had this wonderful opportunity in the field to really address these inequities that have been occurring for some time. And I'm going to just highlight some of these things with great brevity, because again, we have experts who know a lot more about this than I do. But we had some legislative initiatives at the federal level, things like the CARES Act. And then we had a lot of things that happened at the state level as well, with school buses delivering meals and allowing students to access the internet through hotspots on school buses. We had the state board initiatives, and those included, the reopening plans for schools. With Plan A was minimal social distancing, Plan B for moderate social distancing, and then Plan C for remote learning. And I really feel like the state board did a great job of focusing on the health and safety of both the students and school personnel as well, and looking at some of these plans and in the documents that have been published by the state. And I think one of the most exciting things was the focus on the social and emotional needs of our students. Because one of the things that I think we all have to be very aware of is the fact that all of these students have experienced trauma through this pandemic, being home, out of school, lots of changes to the environment and to learning expectations. And then I was able to share our local initiatives. And just a huge kudos to my school partners from Hickory Public Schools. They just did some incredible things. I visited Southwest Primary several times, and they were using their time to just really focus on student needs. And so they were conducting wellness checks. If students weren't logging into classes, they were making phone calls as well as home visits, which I thought was fantastic. Southwest Primary is working on school beautification. The teacher assistants use their time to paint murals on the wall. And there are pictures from some of the most loved children's literature, like The Word Collector and Chicka Chicka Boom Boom. So now you walk into the school and there are these big, beautiful, bright and bold murals on the walls. And the students, when they are able to come back, are going to be ecstatic. I just know it. And the teachers were involved in professional development as well, focusing on building resilience, helping students build resilience, and looking at the effects of trauma on the education of K-12 students. And so just lots of great things going on. And a shout out to also to a nonprofit organization here in Hickory, the Patrick Beaver Learning Resource Community. They continued tutoring their striving readers and used Zoom to do so. So I've just been so impressed, actually blown away by the local efforts and initiatives here in Hickory and in Catawba County. And I
Thank
think
you.
that summarizes. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
I loved your optimism. There's so much crud, and we're going to talk about some of the crud tonight,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
But those bright spots, that's really good news.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. You mentioned the 3 plans: moderate, social distancing, online, remote, and then no social distancing. So let's start with some news that just hit yesterday, right? Governor Cooper was supposed to provide a directive for the reopening of schools in the fall, and he delayed that decision yesterday. So I'm wondering, what does that mean? How did your offices take that news? How does that impact you going forward?
I'll jump on that one. We kind of anticipated that he was going to take some additional time. A lot of the information he receives is contradictory of each other. And so I think that he is really trying to do what is best for the health and safety of all, not just kids, but teachers, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, anyone and everyone that has anything to do with the operation of a school or a school district. What we're going to do in Hickory is we're going to continue planning using all 3 of the scenarios. We anticipate that the governor will come back in a couple of weeks with some idea on how we're going to open school. So we're going to have those plans laid out. We're going to vet those with parents and teachers, and then we're going to take what we hope to be something solid to the school board for their approval, and then we're going to do a all-out campaign and trying to get the community to understand. School's going to look different regardless of how any of this is going to happen. There's going to be some differences in school, whether we come back all together or whether or not we go to the far extreme and stay home and work remotely. It's going to look different. So for everybody to understand, it's going to take a little while for us to get that information out to the community.
Gosh, I'm an educator too, a little bit of a different audience. But our school, LR, has made a decision about what the fall is going to look like and has communicated that. I feel overwhelmed on your behalf, Dr. Whiteside and Dr. Adel. What is it like planning for 3 vastly different scenarios? Is it 3 times the work or even more, considering how different it is during this summer compared to past summers? What are your lives like right now?
Very little sleep. But Dr. Adel mentioned about we are planning for all 3 scenarios, and we have a great team working around the clock on what those would look like for our students and our staff. And Dr. Adel asked each of us to think about which part, as far as with student learning facilities and looking at transportation. Matter of fact, we're going to be going out to our schools next week and just looking at our facilities and working with our principals again to look at the remote as far as with Plan C, and then Plan B. 50% capacity is what is put out there at this point for Plan B, and what that may look like. So we are taking each day and having many Zoom meetings now to contemplate some of those questions that parents will be having. And we are aware of what you mentioned earlier about the trauma of our students and how our students really want to connect with their teachers and their peers and have that engagement. And we know how important that is for them. And so rather it is A, B, or C, we want to make sure that we tap into those needs first and foremost.
One of the things that I I mentioned to Dr. Whiteside beforehand, Dr. Adel, I don't know if we had a chance to chat as much, but one of my jobs at Lenore Rhine is helping our faculty think about fall. And I'm running into a scenario, and Sarah Lures in the audience just asked this question as well. How is the fact that it's, we know A, B, C, but we also know it could be A for a while, and then it could be B for a while, then it could be C, and it might be back to A by the time we're all said and done. How is that scenario playing out, and what is the potential impact on, this is Sarah's question specifically, the potential impact on all of our different stakeholders with that possible shifting on the fly? And if you've got ideas for me, because I don't know how to do this.
I think that, we talk about all the time that we're kind of going through something that has never been done before. And so we're really making the boat while we're on the water. We're very well aware that chances are that things will change. I think the medical experts have indicated that as we get into the colder months, late fall, winter, that the flu season could, cause a problem for folks with the symptoms that are very similar to that of COVID-19. So we suspect that we may end up having to shut down at some point, and go remote again. Our planning is that right now we're all hoping for the best and planning for the worst. I think every superintendent in the state of North Carolina really does not want to see Plan B come into play. That is the most difficult to plan for because of social distancing and the fact that you can only have 50% capacity in each one of the schools, and so that's a real concern for us. But we took the initiative when all this started back in March to begin ordering hotspots and devices, and so we will have and we're ready with that, so that every kid in Hickory City will have access to a hotspot, and every kid in Hickory City will have access to a device. Our elementary teachers are using Google Classroom as their platform, and our middle school and high school teachers are using Canvas. We're having ongoing training through the summer so teachers can join in and learn more about each one of those platforms. So we're preparing for the shift. Our initial thought was that the governor was going to come on yesterday and say that we were going to be in B, that we were going to use option B. And that's what has people up at night. That's the sleepless night, because they just came through last week, DPI, and with the guidance that we can only have 50% capacity on a bus. Now, when they said that, they didn't really say 50% capacity. They came back and said that we can only have one student per seat. So what that does in essence is that takes a 73 passenger bus and turns it into a 22 passenger bus. And so when you're trying to get half the student body at Hickory High School, for instance, that has over 1,000 kids, I can't tell you how many bus routes we're going to have to run. It'd be midday before I'll have everybody in class and ready to go.
Gosh, the logistics of it just boggle my mind. Dr. Adel, you just mentioned training for teachers, and that's Dr. Campbell's area, right? She's a trainer of teachers. She's the head of our LR Scholars Program. How is all of this affecting teacher training for new teachers?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to kick that to Dr. Whiteside. She handles our new teacher training, and this has put a monkey wrench in things.
Thank you. We are working with HR to look at that. We met last week actually to look at how we could have a virtual mini conference and helping with our new teachers and our veteran teachers with remote learning and how that would look. We're going to look at best practices for asynchronous and synchronous learning. And so we are planning for that in early August. Right now we are waiting to see as far as with our students coming back to us, what those classes may look like. We're looking at our kindergarten numbers, how many teachers we will need. And so we're planning for all of that and trying to get those, that PD ready for those teachers. I'm working with the Office of Early Learning especially for our K-3. We have a lot of moving parts that we know that each of our teachers may be questioning, how we will do certain things when we come back and find out what we're going to be doing. So we are trying to, like Dr. Adel said, plan for and be positive, but also think about some of those things that may throw a monkey wrench in where we are. But we are working diligently to make sure that our teachers have the professional learning that they will need and they feel comfortable with. And like I told Dr. Fisher earlier, we will need teachers to teach from an amount of strength for our students because of what they have dealt with. And we will be discussing that about the social emotional piece. And Dr. Campbell, you mentioned resilience. We did a survey on who may need that for our teachers. And it was overwhelmingly, positive, because we talked about the conscious discipline, we talked about zone of regulation, we talked about resilience. And those are the things that we know our kids are going to need because, we have to Maslow before we bloom.
Ooh, I'm gonna write that down. That's language I know.
You're speaking Dr. Campbell's language.
Right.
Can I back up to something that Dr. Adel said? Just I'm thinking about who might be out here in our audience, and I haven't done it for a long time because of COVID-19, but I go back to my family and I talk to them about my job and I talk about working on Canvas and they look at me like, what are you talking about? So just to clarify for those out there in the audience, Canvas is what we call a learning management system. And it kind of pulls together a number of different teaching tools that teachers can use from a distance. A lot of us use it in face-to-face classes as well. So they have discussion boards where students can talk back and forth. I believe there's a video conferencing tool in it, although I think most of us, including Hickory City, have gone to Zoom like we're using tonight. There are places where students can submit assignments, teachers can create little web pages for them that have content that they can look at. So just wanted to make sure everybody knew what we were talking about with that. But I want to follow up with Dr. Campbell on this one. Dr. Whiteside talked about the training of the new teachers coming into the school system, but I know you're responsible for a lot of the training of the teachers who are going to be going into the school system 2021. What are the challenges that you face with COVID-19 on this?
Yeah, so there are many challenges, and one is truly, the application piece of that. And our school systems, our partners have been so wonderful. They have allowed us, in the past to come in and apply teaching strategies and the pedagogical knowledge in their classrooms with their students. And again, we don't have any information if those students will return to the public schools, if they'll be there for us to provide services to or to tutor and have access to. So everything is kind of up in the air. What I have been doing this summer is I formed a focus group of students, former students who are now teachers in Hickory, Newton, and Catawba County. And we actually will start next week meeting at my house. Last week, we were online, but I'm just trying to get a feel for what's working best with online learning. Google Classroom is something that Dr. Adel mentioned, and a lot of those folks have told me that Google Classroom has been something that they've used, and goodness, they've been so creative. They create this whole classroom virtually, and you click on different things within the classroom, different pictures that they've embedded, and they lead to links to sing songs at the kindergarten level, or games online where they can practice their math skills. So teachers are being super creative in terms of engaging their students. I think for me, my concern is access to the K-12 students. And We are just going to have to kind of play that by ear. We hope to partner with Hickory Public Schools, continue that partnership, and whether we're plan A, B, or C, we hope to be able to work with you and to provide the services to the K-12 students, because then that allows our students to really learn and master those pedagogical skills.
That's a great partnership.
Yes.
Excellent. Dr. Campbell, your content really focused a lot on a theme that's been coming up repeatedly throughout this class, and that is of inequities at different levels, so housing and biological, if you want to put it that way. So like the idea that people of color are more vulnerable to the virus itself, and strikingly in so many ways in our educational system. So I'm wondering if y'all could you talk about what measures are being taken toward educational equity in this new learning environment, and will it be enough? Is there a way to make it be enough?
Wow, that's a really good question, and I know that there are a lot of people that have been thinking through that, at least for the last month or two, on how we're going to make it equitable. One of the things that, and I think one of the questions that came through too is, I think there's a lot of people concerned about teachers, and rightfully so, because in essence, in many communities where COVID-19 is rising, and if the governor tells us that we, should go back to school, we're in essence are taking teachers and making them frontline workers. And that's exactly what will be the case. So I think the thing is, and that's a big concern, that's another thing that keeps me up at night, is if teachers elect to stay home, and certainly if they have underlying health conditions, or even if they're just concerned about the virus itself, we're not going to stand in their way. I think that that's the right thing for them to do. Hopefully we'll be able to find some method to utilize their talents while they're home. But on the flip side of that, if we're in face-to-face, it will eventually create a dilemma for us in terms of substitute numbers. Because there are a lot of teachers that, if a lot of teachers decide that they just cannot come back to the classroom right now. So that, I think at that point, individual districts will have some leeway as to how they approach that. And you could see districts go strictly remote as a result of that, if it comes to that case. So I can see that happening in some of the smaller districts, particularly because they'll quickly run out of substitutes. But our number one concern is our kids and our teachers. They need to be able to bring their A game every day, or we're not going to make the progress anyway. So I need people healthy and willing to work, and we'll do whatever we can to support them.
Wow, run out of substitutes. That phrase just really stuck in my mind. I'm imagining like ranks of soldiers. Just, yeah. Wow, that's heavy, Dr. Adel.
The other thing you have to know too is that most substitute teachers are retired employees, so they are at high risk for COVID-19. So that's another concern that we have.
Gosh. What about equity for our students? So I appreciate that the school districts are thinking about the teachers, because, oh gosh, thank God for teachers. Like, I cannot do that job, as not even for my one first grader. I am not qualified for this. Teachers are amazing. So thank you for taking good care of our teachers. What about our students who are facing, who are coming from different places with different privileges, with different advantages?
Well, going back, and I'll let Dr. Whiteside chime in, but going back to what Dr. Campbell had said earlier, one of the bigger concerns that I have are our kids that are special ed and our kids that have 504 plans. These folks were not adequately served when school was abruptly closed in March. We are doing some things right now to be able to try to serve those kids if we have to go remote. I think if we have to go remote, one of the things that we will do is we'll still have our buildings open. And if we need to transport some kids in for therapy, speech therapy, those kind of things, those small numbers we'll be able to do. If they require masks, we went out and bought a bunch of those shields so that you can't take speech therapy in a mask. You got to have your face and your words and all of that. So we went and bought a bunch of those for the therapist as well as for the students. We did have some trouble last year. We've had some of our therapists refuse to do teletherapy. They didn't feel comfortable in doing that. So we're going to be working to make sure that there's a way to get these kids access to the folks that are providing this therapy. One way of doing that, and we initiated it a few months ago, is that as we go in to sign contracts with these different companies and groups that provide physical therapy, occupational therapy, and all that, we had them add a clause that they would see these kids at their facilities in the event that schools were closed. So we'll help with the transportation if need be, but we needed to make sure that those kids were protected. So those are just some of the ways, and I'm sure Dr. Whiteside can probably mention some others.
Yes, I know that you mentioned as far as with inequities, and earlier someone may have mentioned our homeless population. And each of our schools, we have a homeless liaison that works with our families, and this is at each of our schools, and they work with our student service director. So we make sure that those students too, their needs are met first, like I said earlier, because kids can't learn if they're hungry, if they are in a place where they cannot study. Dr. Adel did mention that each student will have a device, a hotspot, if they do need it. And so we got that information through our surveys. And so we have looked at just different angles of how we can help the population of the most need. And then we also looked at our AIG students and how their needs and how they need to be met, and talking with our support staff. So we looked at each group, our ESL, EC, AIG, homeless, and we're like, okay, what are those immediate needs? And then how do we take care of them so that we can teach and they can learn? And transportation department and the school nutrition worked so well together during the March through May closure. They were amazing. And when we had to flip the switch, I say, to remote learning, our teachers used some of their talents and skills that they had learned throughout our personalized learning PD. They went into that toolkit, pulled it out, and did some amazing work.
I wonder if
proud of them. So proud of them. So in our strategic plan, that was one of the things that we wanted to work on. And who knew that it would come so soon, that we would need it. But I can say it was very beneficial, and our teachers were more prepared, and especially having K64 provide the Chromebooks to our students in 612. Wow.
I would echo that. My child has benefited from that. I wonder if I might touch on something here. It's a question that just came from the audience. I don't have a name. It's just listed as JMER, is the person who posted it, but it's something I hadn't really thought about. Dr. Newton and I have learned from doing this class this summer. We've learned a lot about technology. The first week we did this, and participants said, we couldn't hear you very well. So headsets, and then it was lighting. So I've got this nice ring light that now it's shining a little bit too much off the front of my head here. If I had more hair, we wouldn't have that problem. Sorry, audience, this is not something I can fix right now. But the question was, how are we making sure that our teachers have access to the technology that they need? And I know from my own work at Lenore Rhine, there's no one size fits all thing for teachers. My music faculty are coming and saying, I need this. I'm like, I have never even heard of that. Okay, let's talk. So how are we doing that with our public school teachers?
Dr. Adel, would you like me? Okay, yes. This past year, when I talked about the personalized learning, our instructional technology specialist, Jordan Caldwell, and I work real closely together about our PD. And so we had What the Tech Wednesdays. And so
it took a second. Yes, I like
it. And so each Wednesday, and there's about 50 of those, but I cut short this year, we would have 2 different sessions of PD. And we went through Google, Seesaw, Canvas, Google Classroom. We had some of our teachers do their presentation, that we would ask what type of resources that they would need, and we would provide that. Our teachers would do some of the presentations. They went to NC Ties. They brought back some of the things that are out there, we're just trying to keep up to date. And so our teachers would say, this is what we need. Can we get some training on this? And we tried to provide that to them at the local level, at the regional level, and at the state level as well. There's so many new things out there and resources, and some of them are free. So those teachers would use those, and the things that were paid, like Dr. Adel said, we are going to have Canvas, and so we pay for that. And our K-5 will use Google Classroom, but we also made sure that we purchased a license for Zoom for our teachers to be able to have that engagement. So that's also in the works. And so our teachers are asking for, and we're trying to provide as quickly and as much as possible to them. And this is their summer, right? But we still have teachers wanting and are thirsty for more knowledge in anticipation of what's going to happen. And so we also have that ready for them, that they can do some there's modules out there, and it's self-directed. And so we have those out there right now for them to receive the CEU. And I continue to provide them with PD if they would like to participate in that. But we also plan to have more information for them in the coming weeks about the PD. But we feel that our teachers will let us know if there's more that they need, and again, we do have some challenges, but our teachers do have devices. We surveyed them, and we wanted to make sure, is there some issues with broadband with our staff because of maybe where they may live. And so we wanted to make sure that they had what they needed as well to be able to, teach and have those quality lessons for our students.
The teachers did such an amazing job with no notice of pulling off this past the past few months. But it sounds like the experience might be a little bit different in the fall. It sounds like y'all have been putting in a lot of work to make it even better than the amazing heights that they were able to attain, like Dr. Campbell talked about in her lectures, that they were able to pull off at the last minute. I've got a question about online education kind of in general. Dr. Campbell spent a lot of time talking about different techniques that were being used to teach students with different needs. And Dr. Adel, you just spent some time talking about figuring out creative ways of meeting the needs of these different students. But do you think these substitutions, these substitute techniques, are they effective? Is there such a thing as an appropriate online education at all? One of the articles that Dr. Campbell had us read from the New York Times was quoting a teacher, and that teacher, I was just like, my heart sank. That teacher said, "We know this isn't a good way to teach. we want to hold kids accountable. We want to see their progress, be in the classroom with them, see them struggle and overcome that. And when I read that, I was like, gosh, so they're going to do the best that they can, but are we going to be able to see the gains that we would typically see in this next year?
Really good question. To be honest, I don't think so. There's something to be said about a relationship that a child has with his teacher, and the relationship a child has with his peers, and being in a school setting. And that goes back to the social emotional. And if you don't have everything firing together, you're going to have a gap in learning. So, while I think our teachers did an amazing job with the online delivery, I know that if we're, requested to do it again, we would do a better job than what we did last year. But it's not the same. And there would be some learning gaps there. I mean, I always compare, I tell my own kids, I said, I would much rather, in my opinion, for an older learner, I would much rather sit in a classroom of 200 and 300 people. And you all probably have done that with a biology class that you took as an undergraduate or some other class than to sit and take an online class, because I don't feel connected with an online. I can find a connection if I'm there with the professor. So kids are no different. They need that.
Do you think it differs by how old the kids are? I mean, Dr. Campbell, you teach college students, and Dr. Fisher, we shouldn't overlook as an expert in education himself. Does it matter? Can college students handle it better than my first grader did last year?
Yes.
Of course, yes.
Yes, I think they can handle it better, but I think one of the reasons that the teachers were able to make such a quick transition and did such a great job is they had spent the first part of the year building those relationships. Mm-hmm. So when the school year ended, they were connected, and these classrooms, they're learning communities made up of family members. It's their school family. Right. And so it was a little bit, I think, easier to pick up and run with it. When this happened in March, I think it's going to be really tough to start the year that way, because it is so difficult to build relationships online. And I think we also have to consider teacher morale. We teachers, we thrive in that classroom. It's that those interactions with our students, and we read body language and facial expressions. I can tell when a student walks in my door what kind of day they're having after we've developed this relationship. And so I think, we have to consider the teacher morale, and they want to be back at school. The students want to be back at school. Again, we have to, consider health and safety first, but I think it's all so dependent on the relationships. And I know that the teachers will do the best job possible to create those strong relationships, but it is just so much harder online, especially for the little ones.
And I would say that what Dr. Campbell just described is why my immediate reaction was, yes, our college students can do better. I don't think it's ideal for all of them, but I think that the ability to develop relationships and community in online spaces, it's a learned skill. And by the time you get to college, it's a skill that you've started to learn. It may be that our college professors are not using the right communities, because my 16-year-old seems to have learned this skill quite well of how to develop community in an online space. It's not Facebook anymore. I don't know what these platforms are. I wonder if we could turn to two different questions. They're very different questions, but they kind of touch on the fact that there's a lot going on in the public realm around education right now. And I will also preface this question by saying Lenore Ryan had faculty workshops on Monday and Tuesday looking towards the fall. And then on Wednesday, we opened up a module for online preparing for fall 2020. And if you were to ask me about current events from the past week, I would just look at you blankly because there's been so much time invested in that I haven't had a chance to even look at the news. So if this is describing your lives this past week and you want to pass on these questions, you get a free pass because we know how much work you're putting in. But the questions are these. One is about the Montana case yesterday that a lot of people are apparently seeing as a victory for school choice advocates, where the Montana Supreme Court really basically said that the state had to fund some of the religious schools and the private schools. And the question is from someone who notes that her own children are very successful public school graduates, just asking if you all might reflect on that. This is from Monica Childers. I do think it's fair to point out, in the spirit of the liberal arts, recognizing our own biases, that you're probably, this particular panel probably has, you know, my wife works in public education. We've got 2 public school administrators. Dr. Campbell prepares teachers for public schools. So, and then the other is about the American Association of Pediatrics recommendation that came out yesterday, that they said that we should resume school in the fall because the risks to our children of not are greater than the risks of doing. Totally different public things happening, but just opening it up for some reflection on those 2 things.
Wow. Well, I'm biased. I think public schools are absolutely where it's at. You know, I think what public schools offer is diversity. I think public schools absolutely resemble the communities in which these children are going to grow up and live in. And so I want my kids adaptable. And that's how I raised my 2 girls, through the public schools. And I'm confident that they can go anywhere and adapt and live and be comfortable doing that. I'm not sure that private schools can offer that. And so, yeah, I'm all about public schools. The other part, and I'll just throw my 2 cents in about the pediatric. I read the report. I understand they were really concerned about the social emotional well-being of young people. And I think that that's one of the things that the governor had read and caused him to pause before making a decision. You know, I am not opposed to kids coming back to school. I just think that there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of variables associated with it that may, as a superintendent, that could easily get out of my control. And I can't operate that way, you know. And so, just like we had said earlier, if teachers decide that they do not want to come back due to COVID-19, if they have an autoimmune issue, or if they're diabetic, or and we do have teachers that are, you know, older, that may not want to put themselves at risk. It could strain our system in terms of having adequate substitutes, enough substitutes. And quite honestly, we all know I love substitute teachers, but they're not the classroom teachers. So there is a difference in the type of learning that goes on in a classroom when a sub is there versus a regular teacher. And that's concerning.
Dr. Whiteside, do you have any additional thoughts or insights for?
I love public education.
Yeah.
Yay. You mentioned that I have 30 years. Dr. Adel has 35 or more. And so,
I appreciate that.
And but I believe in what we do, and the cost that that may have to incur for our students. You know, we are going to put out there, and I'm not just talking about monetary, the relationships that our students are building with people in their community that they see, they know, they can relate to. You cannot put a price on that. And public education is that for those students. And our parents are amazing because they are trusting that we're going to do the best for their babies. And when they come to school, first and foremost is, are they safe? And then they will learn. And our parents want our kids to stay with Hickory Public Schools. That is their choice because they see that it is the best for their students. And I believe that.
Dr. Campbell talks so much about all of the areas that school covers. Like I had some appreciation of it, but the disruption of these past months have really just put into stark relief everything that our public schools are doing for our children. Safety. So we think education, of course, but like safety, nutrition, transportation,
right?
Everything is going through those schools.
That's public education.
That's public education, taking care of all of those needs.
Yes.
Y'all do an amazing job, an amazing job. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And a question here from Karen that I think is a really good one. Y'all do a great job, but does it have to be all you? What can we as community members do to contribute to this?
Great question.
Yeah, that's a very good question. There's not a school that I know of, not a school district that I can think of that can't use volunteers. We're constantly looking for community support. And it doesn't have to be, a lot of times parents think that to volunteer or to be school active, they have to physically be in the building. They don't. They could donate books. They could donate money. They could donate time. We're always, as a community, as a public school within a community, we can always use the help in about every area.
Dr. Fisher, I think you had a really good question that we had talked about in advance of tonight, kind of in that spirit. So what can we do as community members? And then I imagine that a lot of us who are tuning in tonight are parents themselves.
We appreciate the support from the community. We don't say that enough. And through some of the social media platforms, we see that. And when COVID hit and parents became we used to call surrogate teachers, some of those memes were so funny about, we're going to do whatever we can to help teachers when our students go back to school, because there is that appreciation for what our teachers do. They are amazing, but our parents are too. They are the first teachers. We understand that, and we appreciate our parents and what you do, but just keep those positive thoughts out there about public ed. That's how you can continue to support, continue to talk with your students and be very positive about what's going on and with coming back to school, whatever form it is, continue to do that, because our students need that. They need that adult positivity in their lives right now, because this is something none of us have ever really experienced before. So
there's one more thing, and I'll say how you support. Teachers have been devalued for years in the state of North Carolina, in my opinion. They're grossly underpaid. And so I would ask for every teacher in the state of North Carolina that you keep them in mind when you go to the polls in November.
Yes. Last week we did something that put our panelists a little bit on the spot, and I kind of liked it. So I wonder if we can do it again, which is to ask you a question and get a one-sentence answer from each of you. And then Dr. Newton can fill us in a little bit on what we might have coming next week. And that question, it's the one that Dr. Newton mentioned that I've been struggling with. I've got we got 2 elementary school children, and we talk about, let's go do some reading or let's go work on something. And their answer is, I hate reading. And I know every parent in the world gets that. So one sentence, what can parents do to keep our kids engaged so that we don't have that COVID slide as bad as it might be? Maybe begin with Dr. Adel and then Dr. Whiteside, and then Dr. Campbell gets the final word.
One of the things that I tell parents all the time is that, and I know this is more than a sentence, but kids don't really pick up a book, but they will pick up a Kindle. They'll pick up an iPad. They'll play on the computer. So you take those opportunities to infuse reading skills.
Thank you.
Permission to use a tablet. Yes, thank you, Dr. Adel.
Dr. Whiteside.
I would say model what you are, preaching to your students. Read yourself, show them that, and whatever you're reading as far as with your magazines, or if you do read from the computer or Kindle, model what you want your students and talk to them about what you are doing. Former math teacher, I used to get that quite often. I hate math. Use money.
Yes, the I hate reading breaks this English professor's heart, and I did switch to reading paper books again so that they would see me doing it. Dr. Campbell, your one sentence for that one?
I think that that we really think about the individual child's preferences and interests, and really think about that when we help them select materials to read or whatever. But I also think it, as much as possible, especially for the younger kids, to make it into a game. Switch roles, let them be the teacher. Let them teach you what the book is about, and let them summarize for you as in the role of the teacher. But make it a game and incentivize it. Sometimes we just have to, we bribe. That's what we do, right?
Money. Dr. Newton, what have we got next week?
Oh boy. So next week, Dr. Veronica McComb, a history professor here at LR, is going to be talking to us about past pandemics as a lens for understanding and moving toward the future. History as a means of grappling with what we're dealing with in the present, and then planning for the future. I think it's going to be a really great week. So we're really looking forward to joining her next week.
Fantastic. I do not have enough words to express the gratitude for the presence of Drs. Campbell, Adel, and Whiteside tonight. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Best of luck. You're not going to need luck because you got skill. Best of wishes to you as you move into the fall semester, making this work, and thank you for the work that you do. And we will see you next week.